The question is that the bill be now read a second time. Mr. Liang.
Mr. Deputy Speaker, sir, I will speak on two aspects related to this bill. Firstly, on fiscal prudence and financial discipline, whether that has been undermined with this single bill. And secondly, on intergeneration equity, a somewhat new perspective that increasingly deserves our attention. I will also briefly touch on the other tactical consideration with regards to government's long-term borrowing strategy, namely interest rate levels, credit costs, servicing and repayments of the government borrowings, as well as the development of the Singapore debt capital markets. So firstly, on fiscal prudence and financial discipline. Since independence, the overarching guiding values of our fiscal management has been to spend within our means and to maintain a balanced budget. We save whenever we could for rainy days and refrain from borrowing to pay for our expenditures. Whenever we had surpluses at the end of the term of government, we would either redistribute or endow it for specific uses, such as the Pioneer Generation Fund, the Real Infrastructure Fund, the Special Employment Credit Fund, and so on. Otherwise, we will convert the surpluses to reserves so as to grow the base, to invest, and to generate larger returns contribution in the futures. These values of prudence and discipline are also enshrined in our Constitution. The government of the day must balance the budget during the term of government. The President holds the second key in the use of reserve. And only up to 50% of the NIRC can be used to fund current and annual budget spending. There are also gross borrowing caps set by Parliament on the issuance of government debt securities whose proceeds can only be used for investments. Besides these institutional safeguards, it is also vital to have the alignment at the political stewardship level. We are fortunate to have successive finance ministers who are committed to the values of prudence and discipline. Some would say our finance minister tended to be conservative in managing the budget. Well, they should be. For a small island state like Singapore, a higher safety buffer is always wise and always serve us well too. We must always expect a major storm around the corner that could hit us, and when it does, we can take comfort that we have the resources to decisively tackle and overcome the crisis. Our prudent and disciplined management over the years has allowed Singapore to build a strong balance sheet with net zero debt and attain the highest international sovereign ratings of AAA by the global rating agencies. As a result, whenever the government taps the debt market, is able to borrow at risk-free rate or at zero credit cost. This opens another avenue of inexpensive funding for the government. So the basic question then is whether this differentiated financing strategy where we can now borrow over the long term to fund large-scale infrastructure, capital expenditure, signals and increasingly less prudent management of our finances. In all fairness, the government did borrow in the 1970s and in the 80s to pay for construction of the Changi Airport and our MRT lines. However, since the 1990s, we have used the annual budget and the accumulated surpluses to pay for major infrastructure projects. Under this single framework, lumpy infrastructure costs greater than $4 billion can be financed using long-term debt. I've been pondering over this topic since it was first raised in 2018. Whether should we be concerned with this approach and where it could lead us to. Will this borrowing burden our future generations with high interest costs and large bullet repayments? Or it is indeed timely to now be open to this long-term debt financing so that we can achieve the most optimal outcome for Singapore given the current circumstances. So let's first look at the realities before us. First reality, we do have significant infrastructure expenditures in the immediate future, and these are not small spending items. Projects like the Cross Island Line, the Jurong Rail Line, as well as the deep tunnel sewage systems are not only super big ticket outlays, but their constructions may stretch more than a decade, with benefits accruing across generations. Second reality, even if we are not in the midst of the current COVID crisis, financing such huge expenditure using current revenue or accumulated surpluses will still pose a significant strain to the annual budget allocations. Our recurrent expenditures are already growing each year, while our revenues outlook look increasingly uncertain. The massive pandemic-related relief spending have also exacerbated the strain on our books. To fund such mega long-term projects under current budget cycles, well, we may have to either cut other spending or raise taxes, neither of which are suitable under current environment. So we are indeed facing a situation of tighter fiscal headroom going forward. Should we delay these critical projects because of current budget constraint? Well, these infrastructures are necessary to enhance our capabilities and to improve our quality of life. We should get this project going soonest. Should we then just draw on our reserves to pay for these projects? If this is indeed the instinctive mindset, then we will really be going down the slippery slope. We should not see reserve as an ATM to be drawn on whenever we need money. Reserve should only be used as last resort, such as during a devastating crisis like the one we are in today. They are our last line of defense, and we really need a solid defense. Each draw on reserves also means divesting a part of our financial investments, and so we will lose out on the returns from these investments and their contribution to NIRC. Given this consideration and the current budgetary constraint, I will agree that the next best option will be to borrow for such expenditure, but with strict conditions. I note the list of qualifying criteria to borrow under SINGA, such as the minimum useful life of 50 years, and that the project should support national productivity and achieve economic, environment, and social sustainability goals. Similarly to the GSA and the LTBA, we need to also hard-code the necessary prudential safeguards so that the borrowings are indeed selective and controlled. The overall gross borrowing limits of $90 billion ensures that the government will not run into excessive debt situation and that we will have the ability to service and repay the debt. It's also important to impose an annual interest threshold to avoid overly onerous financing costs on future generations. Although, in my view, the $5 billion threshold appears to be on the high side. And the reason is because besides the interest cost, there's also the depreciation charge, which under the SINGA framework, we need to capitalize the expenditure. And these items, with both the interest cost as well as the depreciation charge, will henceforth be an additional recurring expense item in our annual budget. And this is a significantly large expense item and will make the overall balancing of the budget more challenging going forward. Hence, this option of tapping the debt market to finance very large infrastructure projects can only be palatable if interest rate remains low. Indeed, interest rates are at historical low today, presenting an opportune window for the government to seek funding. It also makes good sense to take advantage of our very solid credit ratings to enjoy zero credit cost borrowing in the market. So also from a capital market development standpoint, having such a high quality issuance will also deepen our bond market, attract a bigger pool of institutional investors to Singapore. So we are far from those countries with high public debt to GDP ratio, which transfer heavy tax burden of today onto future generations, which brings me to the next point on intergeneration equity. Perhaps the more enduring argument as to why we should introduce SINGA is that it helps better manage intergeneration equity when we fund the very large, very long-term infrastructure projects. During the early years of independence, where survivability as a nation was our foremost concern, our pioneering generations saw the need to tighten belts and save for a better tomorrow. The savings built up provided security and benefited subsequent generations, which also saw as their obligation to build on the past savings so as to provide better and more secure life for the next generations. So this is the self-sacrificing spirits of the pioneer generation as well as Merdeka generations. They supported the government's prudent fiscal policy and work hand in hand with the government to grow the reserve and to strengthen our fiscal foundation. As we build up our nest egg over the decades, the government would regularly share and distribute the fruits of our past successes. At the same time, we also accumulate where we could, so as to provide for the higher spending needs in the future. In 2009, the government tweaked the reserve framework and also introduced the NIRC as another contribution to the budget to help pay for our growing current expenditures. In a way, the 50-50 sharing of the NIR represents an intergeneration balance that we want to achieve between current and future generations. In 2015 and 2018, to thank our pioneer and Merdeka generations for their sacrifices, the government set aside a total of $15 billion from accumulated surpluses or current reserves to set up the PGP and MGP to provide for healthcare support for our seniors. The government also increased the share of budget spending in senior facilities and major healthcare infrastructures among others to care for this generation of seniors. On the other hand, in order not to pass the buck of current spending to future generations, we strive to use current revenue to pay for this recurring expenditure, thereby ensuring sound and sustainable operating finances. The financing of our large-scale long-term infrastructures with long-term borrowing is a further manifestation of that spirit of equity. As this infrastructure benefits multi-generations, it is more equitable to share the cost across generations by way of a long-term financing structure. Though I support the government's greater emphasis on intergenerational equity in our fiscal management, we know it's always difficult to find that balance that everyone's agree with. So while we can depend on the framework like SINGA and NIRC to seek better equity, we should never discard our long-held values and ethos of always leaving something behind for our next generation and to strengthen our future. Sir, in Mandarin, please. 议长先生，这个国家重大建设借贷的这个法案 SINGA 引出了一个非常重要的一个课题，那就是我们应该如何看待代际公平 intergenerational equity 这个课题，如何更平衡的分享、分担跨代之间这个财政资源以及负担。过去呢，我们的先辈呢省吃俭用，把钱存起来，好让我们的下一代可以过更好的日子、更稳定的生活。有更多的这个财政资源可以来依靠，以备不时之需。这就是建国初期那一代国人的勤朴、先苦后甜的精神与价值观。也因为有先辈的这个牺牲与奉献呢，我们这一代的国人才能享有可观的储备。也正是因为我们有这份储备，我们面对现在的这个疫情危机，才更有底气和资源来应对。然而，随着国家的这个和经济的逐步成熟，以及人口结构的这个变化，相应的财政政策与做法也需要我们随之改变。尤其是有关这一代和往后几代国人如何均衡分享和分担财政资源和财政责任的这个怎么样的一个处理。我举2个例子。第一，我们当然要继续的强化国家的这个财政基础，这个理念与做法应保持不变。但在每届政府，应如何去处理财政盈余以及储备所赚取的回报收入方面呢？我们可以注入一些跨代分享财政资源的这个考量。这些年来呢，随着我们的财政状况更加的充裕呢，我们可以让这一代国人，包括我们的这个先辈们呢，也能享有到经济增长所带来的这个成果，优化他们的生活。这也之所以政府会推出像建国一代、立国一代配套，或是每届财政预算案呢，都拨出更多的款项，增建医疗设施，更好的照顾年长的国人等等。在储备所赚取的这个回报收入方面呢，我们也在2000年呢修改宪法了，准许一半的这个储备回报收入可用于支付每年现届的这个财政开销，协助平衡每年的这个财政预算。 另一半的回报收入呢，必须转入储备，好让我们的储备也能继续的增长，继续的增添更多的投资收入进入每年的我们的这个财政收入，来应对未来快速增长的开销。我觉得这是一个可接受的一个均衡跨代的一个做法。所谓一人一半，感情不散，这也能增进跨代和谐，让每一代的国人都能共享国家的进步和成果。第二呢，我们也要确保每届的经常开支和经常收入呢都能取得平衡，不会出现赤字，能可持续的长期运作。这一代的国人所花的这个经常开销，也应当由这一代国人来负担，而不是通过贷款或者其他方式花未来的钱，把财政负担转移给下一代国人。所以我觉得这样的思维是个负责任的做法，公平的原则。如今政府提出了这项新法案呢，我认为这恰好是个好契机，继续的在适当的范围内调整跨代财政资源的分配。过去呢，我们建造了这么多这些耗资巨大的而大规模的这个基础设施呢，都会应用现有的财政盈余来支付，也就是说，用当代国人的钱，来支付会惠及后代的这个子孙的这个基建。但是我们都知道，随着人口的老化，经济逐步的成熟，开支不断的增长，我国现在的财政预算呢，已经的确是步入了一个更紧缩的一个状态。现在又遇到冠状病毒这个疫情的危机，直接冲击了经济，也不知道会持续多久。我国的整体财政支出和收入呢的状况肯定会承受更大的压力。如果我们继续应用每年的财政预算的基数来支付这些耗资庞大的基建项目呢，我们可能会面临需要减少其他方面的开支，或者需要增加税收的这个抉择。这两个选择呢，在现阶段的经济状态其实都是处于两难的一个抉择。所以有了这个新法案，用发长期债来融资长期大规模的基础设施的这个经费，可说是现阶段的次优选择。我想提出两个主要的支持论点。第一呢，目前呢我们的这个长期利率的确处于接近历史超低的这个环境，因此我们可以利用这个窗口，把借贷的低融资成本降到最低。第二呢，通过发长期债的方式呢，我们可以借用这个结构，发挥代际公平、跨代分担的这个效应，新建长期的基础设施，如这个跨岛地铁线呢、伊朗区域线，或者是这个深隧道阴沟系统工程呢，都是长期的跨代项目。我们未来几代的国人都会直接的受惠于这些设施。通过长期的贷款，更可以更适当的分散这些巨大经费的负担，由几代人来共同的承担，这将会是更公平，也可以避免出现现届财政预算呢出现大波动不平衡的一个现象。当然，我们也有责任，要确保不会有庞大的债务留给我们的子孙这个情况。在这项法案呢，其中也制定了一些关键的准则，必须遵守，如借贷的这个总额不能超出900亿元的顶线，每年的这个利率支付也不能超出50亿的这个门槛等。这两个顶线用意在于要确保政府不会出现过多的债务状况，并且将有能力偿还这个债务。我相信这个法案将给予政府多一个财政管理的工具，可供政府更敏捷地应对目前不明朗的状况，也更有灵活的这个政策空间，可以处理代际公平这个重要的课题。So I have two final clarifications. First, during the debate in 2021 budget statement earlier this year, I had suggested if the fiscal condition remains tight, the government consider special purpose borrowing to finance time-critical and worthy investments to avoid having to divest our financial investment in the past reserves. In his roundup speech, DPM replied that the government would study the possibility of one-off special purpose borrowing to finance economic investment to help Singapore emerge stronger from COVID-19. So can I clarify whether the government envisaged that the consideration behind such once-off borrowing would be different from those of Singapore? My own thinking is that when I made the suggestion during the budget statement debate, that it should be different. Singapore is meant to finance major long-term infrastructure benefiting multiple generations. I would suggest that the one-off special purpose borrowing be to finance economic investments to emerge stronger and should only be done in the context of the exceptional circumstances presented by COVID-19. For example, we need to invest in capabilities that take advantage of the new opportunities in the global economy arising out of COVID. So if our revenues are insufficient to fund this investment due to the economic situation being subdued, then we can deploy such special purpose borrowing. And such special purpose borrowing can also be distinguished from the normal borrowing in that it is one-off, it has a clear nexus with strategies for post-COVID recovery and investments, and also help us keep our assets invested. So could DPM provide an update on this? My second clarification is, as mentioned in my speech, one of the most invaluable international accolade that we receive
Excuse me, Mr. Liang, you have to wrap up quite shortly, please.
It's our AAA rating by all three major global rating agencies. I believe we are among the remaining 9 countries in the world left that continues to enjoy these highest ratings. So being a AAA rated sovereign enables us to borrow at the international market at a risk-free rate. It also has implications on the borrowing cost of Singapore corporates, as bonds issued by corporates, companies are often benchmarked to the Singapore government yield curve. So can I ask the DPM if our AAA rating status could be affected with this Singapore bill? And how has the rating agencies and international market responded to this new move? So I support the bill. Thank you, sir.